The Galactic Council Station Omega-7 hung in the void like a massive metallic donut, spinning lazily to generate artificial gravity for the hundreds of species that called it neutral ground. Today, however, the neutrality felt about as genuine as a Ferengi's charity donation. Admiral Vashy of the Zenthari Empire adjusted his ceremonial battle plates, the chitinous armor catching the harsh fluorescent lighting of Conference Room 12. His 4 arms gestured dismissively at the holographic display showing human military statistics. "Look at these numbers, colleagues," he chittered in that annoying way Zenthari did when they thought they were being clever. "Remove their projectile weapons, their explosive devices, their technological crutches, and what remains?" The assembled delegates leaned forward in their various chairs, perches, and hovering platforms. Commander Tom Mali, the lone human representative, sat perfectly still in his standard-issue uniform. No ceremonial armor, no visible weapons, no intimidating physical modifications. Just a middle-aged man with graying temples who looked like he should be selling insurance rather than representing Earth's military interests. "I mean seriously," Vashy continued, his mandibles clicking with what passed for laughter among his species. "Have you seen them without their guns? They are soft, pink creatures with no natural defenses, no claws, no armor plating, no venom sacs, no electromagnetic discharge capabilities." He paused for dramatic effect, which was completely wasted on a room full of beings who measured drama in centuries rather than moments. Strip away their machines, and they become nothing more than, well, walking meat. The Gorvak delegation rumbled their agreement, their stone-like hides scraping against their reinforced seating. The Krillian observer hissed approval through needle-sharp teeth. Even the normally diplomatic Maloney representatives bobbed their heads in what could charitably be called thoughtful consideration. Commander Mali simply smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Admiral Vashy stood nearly 8 feet tall when he bothered to use his legs instead of his preferred aggressive crouch. His exoskeleton gleamed with battle scars that he absolutely loved showing off at diplomatic functions, much to everyone's annoyance. 4 arms meant 4 times the gesticulating, and Vashy had never met a gesture he couldn't overuse. His species had conquered 17 systems through sheer brutality and an unfortunate tendency to solve problems by hitting them with progressively larger hammers. Judge Quintara floated serenely above her designated platform, her translucent Maloney form rippling with bioluminescent patterns that supposedly indicated deep thought, but mostly just made everyone seasick. The Maloney had achieved galactic peace through aggressive pacifism, which was exactly as contradictory as it sounded. Quintara had officiated more interspecies disputes than anyone else still breathing, mainly because she was too polite to die and leave the job to someone competent. General Kraftnog looked like someone had tried to build a tank out of angry granite and given up halfway through. His Gorvak physiology meant he could probably headbutt his way through a starship hull, and his personality suggested he had tried this on multiple occasions. He communicated primarily through grunts, growls, and the occasional complete sentence that usually involved threats of violence. Brandon Torres sat beside Commander Mali, frantically taking notes on a tablet, and occasionally shooting worried glances at his superior officer. Torres had the unenviable job of being Earth's diplomatic liaison, which meant spending most of his time apologizing for things humans had done, were doing, or were probably going to do in the near future. His stress levels were legendary even by human standards. In the back corner, partially hidden by shadow, and what appeared to be a personal cloaking field, sat Quartermaster A. Nobody knew his real name, his species, or even if he was the correct pronoun. What everyone did know was that Quartermaster A had been present at every major galactic conflict for the past 2 centuries, always watching, always taking notes, and never taking sides. His reports were classified at levels that made top secret look like a grocery list. And then there was Amy Kowalski. She stood exactly 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighed maybe 130 pounds soaking wet, and looked like she should be teaching kindergarten rather than providing security for interspecies negotiations. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her uniform was standard human military issue without any decorations, and her expression suggested she was mildly bored by the entire proceedings. The assembled aliens looked at her and saw lunch. Admiral Vashy's mandibles clicked in what his species considered sophisticated amusement, though it sounded more like someone stepping on bubble wrap. "Commander Molly, your government's military reports are impressive," he said, managing to make the word sound like an insult. "However, these statistics all assume your soldiers have access to their precious weapons, do they not?" Commander Molly raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, Admiral. Could you clarify your point?" "My point, dear human, is that your entire military doctrine revolves around compensating for your species' obvious physical limitations." Vashy's forearm spread wide in a gesture that was probably meant to be magnanimous, but came across as condescending. "Your projectile weapons, your explosive devices, your technological gadgets, all crutches for a species that evolution clearly marked as prey, rather than predator." The Gorvak delegation rumbled their approval. General Krafnog managed a complete sentence. "Soft meat, no claws. Weak." Brandon Torres looked like he was developing an ulcer in real time. His stylus tapped nervously against his tablet as he calculated the diplomatic fallout from whatever was about to happen. The man had excellent instincts for impending disaster. "For instance," Vashy continued, warming to his theme like a professor who had finally found someone to lecture, "remove our weapons, and we Zenthari still possess 4 arms, natural armor plating, and mandibles capable of crushing metal. The Gorvak have stone-like hides and strength that can bend titanium. The Krillians have retractable claws and reflexes that operate in microseconds." He gestured dismissively at Amy, who was still standing quietly by the wall. "Your security specialist there. What does she have?" "Soft skin, brittle bones, and no natural weapons whatsoever." Amy tilted her head slightly. "Would you like a demonstration, Admiral?" The question hung in the air like a bad smell at a dinner party. Several delegates exchanged glances. Quartermaster A leaned forward slightly, his first movement anyone had noticed in the past hour. Vashy's laugh sounded like a garbage disposal, having mechanical difficulties. "Oh, this is rich. The little human wants to demonstrate her combat prowess." He looked around the room, clearly expecting support for his amusement. "Against whom? One of my warriors? A Gorvak soldier? Perhaps a Krillian hunter?" "Your choice," Amy said.
Oh.
Her tone so casual, she might have been offering to demonstrate how to make coffee. 1, 2, or all 3 at once. Whatever makes you feel confident in your hypothesis. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that makes historians write entire chapters. Brandon Torres put his head in his hands. Commander Molly's smile grew wider. Judge Quintara's bioluminescent patterns shifted to what the Maloney called morbid curiosity, but everyone else recognized as the equivalent of reaching for popcorn. General Krafnog stood up, his rocky hide scraping against his chair. "I fight small human," he declared, probably using up his word quota for the week.
Make it 3.
Amy said, checking her watch. "I have a lunch appointment in 20 minutes. Admiral Vashy's mandibles stopped clicking entirely. This was either going to be very educational, or very embarrassing, possibly both. The station's training facility was a marvel of interspecies engineering, which was a polite way of saying it looked like someone had let a committee of drunk architects design a gymnasium. The floor could adjust its gravity, density, and friction to accommodate everything from gas-based life forms to creatures that communicated through seismic vibrations. Today, it was set to standard humanoid, which meant everyone could walk around without floating away or sinking through the deck plating. Word had spread through the station with the speed of gossip in a small town, and the observation deck filled rapidly with beings who had nothing better to do than watch what promised to be either a spectacular fight or a very brief execution. The smart money was on execution. 3 volunteers had stepped forward, each representing the pinnacle of their species' warrior traditions, though volunteered might have been a generous term. Admiral Vashy had essentially volunteered them by pointing and making aggressive chittering noises. Commander Zex represented the Zenthari. He stood 7.5 feet tall, his exoskeleton polished to mirror brightness, 4 arms ending in claws that could rend steel. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator who had never encountered anything he couldn't dismember. His pre-fight warm-up routine involved punching holes in a titanium practice dummy, which he did with casual efficiency while staring at Amy like she was an interesting insect. The Gorvak warrior called himself Thorn, probably because Crush's things with face was too long for official paperwork. He looked like a small mountain had learned to walk upright and developed anger management issues. His species didn't bother with weapons because their entire bodies were weapons. Thorn demonstrated this by headbutting a support beam hard enough to leave a dent, then grunting with satisfaction. The Krillian representative went by Skex, and moved like liquid death poured into a vaguely humanoid mold. His retractable claws extended and retracted in hypnotic patterns while he stretched, each movement precise and economical. Krillians were ambush predators by nature, built for speed and lethality. Skex could probably disembowel a target in the time it took most beings to blink. Amy Kowalski stood in the center of the training mat, hands clasped behind her back, watching the three warriors with the kind of polite attention usually reserved for PowerPoint presentations about quarterly earnings reports. Judge Quintara floated to her designated officiating position, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to official business, mixed with "this is probably a terrible idea." Her voice resonated through the chamber's translation systems. Standard combat rules apply. No weapons, no lethal force, victory by incapacitation or surrender. The match ends when one side is unable to continue. Brandon Torres was frantically typing on his tablet, probably composing his resignation letter. Commander Mali stood beside him with his arms crossed, wearing the expression of someone watching a magic trick he had seen before. The betting pools formed with remarkable speed. The odds were running roughly 300 to 1 against the human, which seemed optimistic from Amy's perspective. Most beings were betting on how quickly she would go down, rather than if she would go down. The over-under for her survival time was currently set at 15 seconds, and most of the smart money was taking the under. Quartermaster A had somehow acquired front-row seating, and what appeared to be alien popcorn. "Combatants ready?" Judge Quintara asked, though it seemed like a rhetorical question given that Amy looked like she was waiting for a bus while her opponents looked like they were preparing to hunt mammoths. Amy nodded once. The three warriors assumed combat stances that had been perfected over millennia of warfare. Judge Quintara's patterns shifted to begin combat, with just a hint of "may whatever gods are listening have mercy on your soul." The match began. What happened next would be debated in military academies across 17 systems for the next century, though most of the debate would center around whether the security footage had been doctored, slowed down, or replaced entirely with an elaborate holographic simulation. The three warriors moved with the coordinated precision of apex predators, who had trained together for this exact scenario. Commander Zex came in high and fast, his forearms spread wide to prevent escape routes while his mandibles clicked in anticipation. Thorn charged straight forward like a living battering ram, counting on his stone-like hide to absorb any desperate counterattack. Skex circled left with liquid grace, his retractable claws extended, and ready to end the fight with surgical precision. It was a textbook multi-species assault formation, designed to overwhelm a single opponent through superior numbers, positioning, and raw physical advantage. The tactic had been used successfully in countless battles across galactic history. It should have worked perfectly against one small, soft, weaponless human female. Amy Kowalski moved. The first thing that became clear to the stunned observers was that humans apparently had a very different relationship with physics than most species. Where other beings moved through space, Amy seemed to flow around it, as if gravity was more of a suggestion than a law. Commander Zex, charging at full speed with over 400 pounds of armored momentum, suddenly found himself spinning through the air in a direction he had not intended to go. Amy had stepped inside his guard, grabbed his leading arm with both hands, and used his own velocity against him, in a move that looked deceptively simple. The Zenthari warrior's trajectory shifted from intimidating charge to uncontrolled flight in the space between heartbeats. He hit the training mat with a sound like a dropped piano, his exoskeleton cracking against the reinforced flooring. The impact was hard enough to register on the station's seismic sensors. Thorn, witnessing his teammate's sudden conversion from warrior to projectile, had approximately 0.3 seconds to process this information before Amy was somehow beside him. The Gorvek's stone-like hide had evolved to withstand plasma bolts, kinetic weapons, and the occasional small asteroid impact. It had not evolved to withstand a human female, who apparently knew exactly where every nerve cluster in his body was located. Amy's strike looked like a gentle tap, the kind of gesture someone might use to get a friend's attention at a noisy party. Her fingertips made contact with a spot just below Thorne's left shoulder blade for perhaps a tenth of a second. The mountain of living rock that was General Thorne's representative simply shut down, collapsing to the deck like someone had unplugged his power supply. His nervous system, which had served him faithfully through dozens of battles, decided to take an unscheduled vacation. Skex, the Krillian hunter, had been circling for the perfect opportunity to strike. His species were ambush predators, built for patience and precision. He had been waiting for Amy to become distracted with his teammates before moving in for the kill. This plan had several flaws, the primary one being that it assumed Amy was not already aware of his exact position, intended trajectory, and probable attack pattern. As Skex lunged forward, claws extended in a killing strike that would have impressed his ancestors, Amy did something that violated several basic principles of combat tactics. Instead of moving away from the attack, she moved into it, slipping inside the arc of those deadly claws with timing that seemed impossible. Her left hand caught Skex's wrist, her right hand found his elbow, and suddenly the Krillian's own momentum was working against him in ways that evolution had never prepared him for. Skex found himself face first against the training mat, his own claws pinned harmlessly beneath his body, while Amy applied pressure to joints that Krillians were not supposed to be able to bend in those directions. The proud hunter made a sound that roughly translated to "I would like to surrender now, please," though it came out more as a high-pitched whine. Total elapsed time, 2.7 seconds. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that makes religious converts and ruins political careers. It was the silence of fundamental assumptions being violently readjusted. It was the silence of an entire room full of beings suddenly realizing that they had been operating under a critical misunderstanding about the nature of reality. Admiral Vashy's mandibles hung open in an expression that his species had no word for, mainly because they had never needed one. Judge Quintara's bioluminescent patterns cycled through colors that the Maloney language associated with concepts like impossible, unprecedented, and I may need to update my entire world view. Brandon Torres stopped typing his resignation letter. Commander Molly's smile became positively predatory, and Amy Kowalski checked her watch again. "Lunch in 17 minutes, she announced to nobody in particular, stepping carefully around the groaning forms of 3 warriors who were slowly coming to terms with their new understanding of human capabilities. The betting pools fell very, very quiet. The first sound to break the silence was Admiral Vashy's mandibles clicking in a pattern that usually indicated either deep thought or a complete nervous breakdown. Given the circumstances, it was probably both.
That cannot be possible,"
he stammered, his 4 arms gesturing wildly at the 3 groaning warriors.
"The laws of physics,
Momentum conservation, basic biomechanics." Amy looked up from where she was helping Skex untangle his claws from his own limbs.
Just
basic redirection principles. You use their energy instead of fighting it. Pretty standard stuff, really."
Standard.
Judge Quintara's bioluminescent patterns were cycling through what could only be described as existential confusion. You just defeated 3 of the galaxy's most accomplished warriors in under 3 seconds using standard techniques.
Well, basic training techniques.
Anyway, Amy shrugged, the gesture so casual it made several observers question their understanding of reality. Every human security specialist learns this stuff. We call it hand-to-hand combat fundamentals. Nothing fancy. General Kraftnog, who had been silent during his representative's humiliating defeat, managed to croak out a question that was on everyone's mind.
"How many fighting styles do humans have?"
Amy paused, apparently giving this serious consideration.
"Active styles currently in use,
maybe 8,000. Could be more. We keep making new ones whenever we get bored with the old ones." She noticed the stunned expressions around the room.
"What?
Did you think we only had one way to fight?" Brandon Torres, who had been frantically taking notes, looked up from his tablet.
"Amy,
maybe we should ease them into this concept."
"Oh, right.
Sorry." Amy turned back to the assembled delegates, who were staring at her like she had just announced that humans could breathe vacuum. "Look, it's not that complicated. Every human culture developed its own fighting methods. Then we met other human cultures, learned their methods, improved on them, and created hybrid styles. We have been doing this for thousands of years. A Vorthan delegate in the back raised a tentacled appendage. Excuse me, but did you say 8,000 distinct combat methodologies? Active ones. Yes, we probably have records of twice that many historical styles. Amy was clearly enjoying this conversation, though she was trying to hide it. Then there are the specialized variations for different environments, gravity levels, atmospheric conditions, available equipment. Centauri military attaché, who had been taking notes, dropped his stylus. Different. Gravity levels? Well, sure. Low-gravity fighting is completely different from high-gravity fighting, and vacuum combat is its own specialty entirely. Amy noticed the growing horror on the faces around her. Guys, seriously, this is not that complicated. Humans adapt. It is what we do. Commander Zex, who had managed to sit up despite his cracked exoskeleton, raised one of his functioning arms. The move you used on me, that was Aikido variant, modified for four-armed opponents. We developed those techniques after our first contact with the Centauri military. Your species telegraphs its attacks through arm positioning patterns. Very predictable once you know what to look for. Silence that followed this revelation was different from the previous silences. This was the silence of military strategists, realizing that their entire tactical doctrine might need fundamental revision. A Maloney observer floated forward hesitantly. You said you developed techniques specifically for fighting Centauri after first contact. Oh, we developed techniques for fighting everyone after first contact, Amy replied cheerfully. Standard procedure. Meet new species. Analyze their physical capabilities and fighting patterns. Develop appropriate countermeasures. Basic diplomatic preparation. Admiral Vashy made a sound that his translation unit struggled to process, finally settling on something that roughly meant existential horror mixed with professional admiration. A Krillian delegate spoke up from near the back. This explains the incident at the Outer Rim negotiations, and the security demonstration on Kepler Station, added a Gorvak observer. Do not forget what happened during the trade summit on Proxima 7, muttered another voice. Amy looked genuinely curious. What happened on Proxima 7? The room erupted in overlapping conversations as delegates began sharing their own encounters with human diplomatic security. Stories of human negotiators who could apparently break bones with their bare hands, security personnel who moved like liquid shadows, and trade representatives who could disarm trained assassins using nothing but improvised weapons and an alarming knowledge of alien anatomy. Commander Molly stepped forward, his smile now resembling that of a predator who had just realized he was not in fact surrounded by larger predators, but by a buffet. Perhaps, he said diplomatically, we should discuss humanity's willingness to share some of these basic training techniques with our galactic partners. The expressions of horror that greeted this suggestion were absolutely priceless. Judge Quintara's patterns shifted to what roughly translated as impending philosophical crisis, as she tried to process the implications. Commander Molly, perhaps you could explain how your species developed such comprehensive combat capabilities. Brandon Torres seized the opportunity like a diplomat grabbing a lifeline. Well, Your Honor, it all comes down to evolutionary pressure. Earth is what we classify as a death world. What now? Admiral Vashy's voice had climbed several octaves, which was impressive considering his species' vocal range. Death world, Amy repeated helpfully. Planet where everything tries to kill you, all the time. For millions of years. Torres pulled up a holographic display of Earth, and the assembled delegates leaned forward, with the kind of morbid fascination usually reserved for watching traffic accidents. Earth's ecosystem is competitive. We have apex predators on land, in water, and in the air. Venomous creatures, parasitic organisms, hostile weather patterns, seismic instability, an atmospheric composition that changes seasonally. That sounds like a prison planet, whispered a Vorthan delegate. Gets worse, Amy added cheerfully. Humans started at the bottom of the food chain. No claws, no armor, no venom, no natural weapons, just big brains and opposable thumbs. Admiral Vashy was beginning to understand the scope of his miscalculation. So you developed intelligence to compensate for physical limitations. Not just intelligence, Torres explained, warming to his subject. Adaptability. Humans learn to use tools, coordinate hunting strategies, and most importantly, fight everything that tried to eat us. He gestured to Amy. Every human combat style evolved from our ancestors figuring out how to kill something that was bigger, stronger, faster, or more naturally armed than we were. Commander Zex, still nursing his cracked exoskeleton, spoke slowly. You are saying that humans spent millions of years learning to fight. Learning to win fights, Amy corrected. Big difference. Fighting is easy. Winning against superior opponents requires technique. The Maloney observer's patterns had shifted to what could only be described as academic fascination mixed with existential dread. This explains your species' technological development patterns. You do not just create weapons, you create solutions. Exactly. Torres nodded. When we met the Zentharay, we did not just build bigger guns. We studied Zentharay physiology, analyzed their combat doctrine, and developed specific techniques to neutralize their advantages. Admiral Vashy's worldview was not just cracking, it was undergoing complete structural failure. But we are larger, stronger, naturally armored, and predictable, Amy said gently. The way someone might explain basic math to a confused child. Your advantages make you overconfident. Overconfidence creates patterns. Patterns can be exploited. A Gorvac delegate who had been silent until now spoke up. What about our stone-like hides? How do you defeat natural armor? Amy smiled. Every armor has weak points, joints, nerve clusters, pressure points. You just have to know where to look. The revelation was spreading through the chamber like a virus. Species that had considered themselves militarily superior to humans were rapidly recalculating their assessments. The Krillians were reassessing their stealth doctrine. The Zentharay were questioning their reliance on physical intimidation. The Gorvac were wondering if maybe, possibly, they had been approaching combat entirely wrong. Brandon Torres struck while the iron was hot. Of course, Earth would be happy to establish cultural exchange programs with any interested species, military training exchanges, combat technique seminars, adaptive strategy workshops. You are offering to teach us how to fight like humans? Judge Quintara asked, her patterns cycling through colors that had no translation but definitely involved the concept of dangerous opportunity. Torres smiled his most diplomatic smile. We prefer to think of it as teaching you how to fight like survivors. The silence that followed was the sound of an entire galactic power structure realizing it needed to be completely re-evaluated. Admiral Vashy looked at his hands, as if seeing them for the first time. 4 arms had always seemed like an advantage before. The formal apologies began approximately 10 minutes later, once the various delegates had finished emergency consultations with their respective military advisors. Admiral Vashy led the procession, his mandibles clicking in what his species considered a gesture of profound respect, though it sounded more like someone nervously shuffling cards. Commander Mali, Security Specialist Kowalski, Vashy began, his voice carrying none of its earlier arrogance. The Zentharay Empire formally acknowledges that our previous assessments of human military capabilities were inadequate, catastrophically wrong, added General Krafnog, who apparently had more vocabulary than anyone had given him credit for. Amy waved dismissively while helping Thorne to his feet. The Gorvac warrior was still wobbly but seemed to be regaining sensation in his extremities. No big deal, happens all the time. You should have seen the Rigelians' faces when we demonstrated zero-gravity combat techniques. Judge Quintara floated closer, her patterns now displaying what the Maloney called profound educational experience. This incident has highlighted a critical flaw in our species' assessment protocols. We have been evaluating military capabilities based on obvious physical attributes rather than adaptive potential. New security protocols are already being drafted, announced the Vorthan delegate, several tentacles working furiously on multiple data tablets simultaneously. All diplomatic facilities will now classify human personnel as Category Alpha security risks, regardless of apparent physical stature or equipment status. Commander Zex, who had managed to stand despite his damaged exoskeleton, approached Amy with visible caution. The techniques you used, Would your government consider training exchange programs? Amy looked to Commander Molly, who nodded slightly. Sure, we have a 6-month basic program that covers fundamental principles. Fair warning though, the physical conditioning requirements are pretty intense. How intense? Asked Skex, flexing his recently untangled claws experimentally. Well, the dropout rate is usually around 90%, Amy said cheerfully. But that includes humans, so do not take it personally. Admiral Vashy was frantically making notes on his personal device. I need to contact Fleet Command immediately. Our entire tactical doctrine regarding human vessels may need fundamental revision. Probably a good idea. Commander Molly agreed diplomatically. Our ship captains tend to be former military personnel. They know all the same techniques Amy just demonstrated. The look of dawning horror on Vashy's face suggested he was remembering every confrontational encounter the Zenthari fleet had ever had with human vessels, and recalculating the outcomes if those encounters had gone differently. Judge Quintara's final observation resonated through the chamber's translation systems. Perhaps the most dangerous assumption any species can make is that they understand the limits of another species' capabilities. Amy checked her watch one final time. Lunch in 3 minutes, she announced, and headed for the exit, leaving behind a room full of beings who would never look at humans quite the same way again. Quartermaster A finally spoke for the first time that day, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. I have observed 17 major galactic conflicts, he said quietly, making notes on his ever-present tablet. I have seen species extinct themselves through overconfidence. Today I watched the most dangerous species in known space demonstrate why they choose to use weapons. The assembled delegates turned to stare at him, mandibles, tentacles, and various other appendages frozen in confusion. You still do not understand, Quartermaster A continued, his tone almost gentle. Humans do not use weapons because they need them. They use weapons because it is more efficient than the alternative. What you witnessed today, this is what they consider merciful. The realization settled over the chamber like a cold fog. Every diplomatic dinner, every trade negotiation, every casual interaction with human personnel, they had been surrounded by beings who could have ended them in seconds but chose not to. Admiral Vashy's final entry in his personal log that day read simply, "Recommend immediate revision of all human interaction protocols. Also recommend we never ever make them angry." The galaxy suddenly felt much smaller, and much more dangerous. But only if you were on the wrong side of humanity.